Welcome to this podcast from Stratfor, leader in global intelligence.
President Barack Obama says that the decision to cancel the proposed ballistic missile defense system in the Czech Republic and Poland wasn't made because of Russian opposition to the plan. Obama said in an interview with CBS News that if the product of it is that the Russians feel a little less paranoid and are willing to work more effectively with us to deal with threats like ballistic missiles from Iran or nuclear developments in Iran, then that's a bonus. But could the White House really have made this decision without considering Russia? Welcome to Stratfor. I'm Colin Chapman, and to discuss this issue I have with me Dr. George Friedman, Stratfor's founder and chief executive. George, perhaps we've been watching too many videos of the West Wing, but this statement by Obama does stretch the imagination.
Frankly, it boggles the mind. The question of the placement of ballistic missile defense, particularly in Poland, had been a major issue at the summit between Obama, Medvedev, and Putin, and the decision to withdraw it at this time, the idea that it was taken without any consideration of how the Russians would view it, was very odd.
Presumably the technological explanation is plausible, but if it is plausible, why are allies in Eastern Europe and a lot of people in Washington fairly upset about it?
The ballistic missile defense system did nothing to protect Poland, but it was a symbol of the United States' commitment to Polish national security, since by placing it there, the United States would have to defend the missile system, and defending the missile system would defend Poland. That said, the more important issue was the future of Poland between the United States and Russia, whether it would be simply part of the American defense system or whether it would be a neutral zone, essentially disarmed with foreign powers as the Russians wanted.
But it's not going to be disarmed, is it? Despite the withdrawal of this system, the United States is still going to retain links with Poland and supply it with quite a lot of weaponry.
Well, the United States has already supplied it with 48 F-16s with very advanced systems. The Poles are now asking for Patriot missiles in the place of the ballistic missile defense system. Washington has hung back in promising that, although it would be politically very wise to give it at this point. And that's another indication that this has everything to do with Russia. The United States is not going to turn around and give the Poles the Patriot missiles. That would really indeed pose a problem for the Russians.
Are the Russians, in your view, likely to give anything at all in return?
The Russians have made it clear that they have already given something up front, which is allowing U.S. forces to transit to Afghanistan through Russia. And afterwards, they said they would suspend their deployment of missiles in Kaliningrad. The real issue that everyone is concerned with, of course, is Iran. The October 1st talks are coming, and the October 1st talks are about sanctions, and those sanctions won't work unless the Russians are on board. The Russians see no reason to be on board, and nothing that was given this last week to the Russians in the form of the ballistic missile defense system will warrant that high repayment.
So you don't see any change of mind there?
I see us on the edge of a decision that the Russians have to make. On the one side, they can participate in the sanctions against Iran and try to negotiate a satisfactory relationship with Washington. On the other hand, they may decide to do nothing on Iran until the United States makes concessions on Ukraine and Georgia, which is what I think they're going to do, in which case very little will have changed. And quite possibly the president wants to downplay this entire affair in order not to raise expectations about what the Russians will do.
In the meantime, I see that Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, has repeated again on television that Iran has no intention whatever of building nuclear missiles. Now, we know he said that before, but this timing is interesting, isn't it, as we just come up to an important United Nations General Assembly and with the October 2nd talks looming.
The Iranian position is they do not have a nuclear weapons program. And what they are doing is developing a legitimate civilian power program. This has always been the Iranian position. Khamenei repeated it, and I suspect that he repeated it simply because he is setting up the situation for the October 1st talks. The Iranians are going to go there to Stonewall, and he wants to make it very clear to those people who think there might be a split between President Ahmadinejad and himself that there really isn't any. They will be negotiating together.
Does this all mean that we might be moving towards some other kind of closure? In other words, the Israelis will become more and more restive and actually might attack?
The Israelis are not fooling around when they say that they will not accept an Iranian nuclear weapon. Their position is that given what President Ahmadinejad has said about the destruction of Israel, they have to assume the worst case, which is that he plans to use it against Israel. So long as there were diplomatic processes underway that had some hope of settling this problem, the Israelis felt that there was time, because they didn't think the Iranians were that close. But if this particular attempt at placing sanctions on Iran fails, then the Israelis may well decide that there is no diplomatic function and that waiting presents risks and no benefits. So the really important thing is that if it turns out on October 1st that the Russians block any sort of sanctions, then the Israelis will have to decide not if but when they plan to strike, and in their calculus I think sooner will be better than later.
Dr. George Friedman ending today's podcast, and you can read George's geopolitical diary on this subject on our website at www.stratfor.com. I'm Colin Chapman. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.